First off, I want to thank Lee for the introduction and thank the Native Plant Society for inviting me back again. As Lee said, it's been 4 years since I last presented this. So I'm going to have a lot of pictures that are before and after. If it doesn't have a date on it, then it was before, which is around April, May, June of 2020. And if it's this year, it'll have a date on it, like May or June, July 2024. Once again, my name is Jake Aalfs. I'm a landscape architect, do a lot of stuff with maps, GIS. I work at a company called Studio DWG. We have offices in Austin and recently in London, of all places. And so I get to work on a lot of cool projects, do a lot of mapping. I'm working on right now on mapping the light rail system up in Austin. And we do a lot of ecological stuff. So we really get out there and try to work on projects that build the land back up, not just develop the land. So great owners, a company that I really love working for. A little bit more about myself. I told you where I work. I'm originally from California, moved out here in, well, what was it, 2012 or so. But I did, the property we're going to look at today, I did buy in 2006, of all things. First moved out here then. Couldn't find a job, so I moved back to California, but I had purchased the house while I was here. So I ended up renting it out for 8 years and had a series of renters in there. I was very lucky that they took care of the house. One set of renters, the last set that was in there though, they just like to have the yard clear. So they had hired someone and they weed whacked the whole backyard down to the ground. And I don't have a picture of that, but when I moved into the house in 2014, then I started a couple years later, put up a fence around the yard and started making improvements. Initially, I bought the house brand new and the builders had an option for native plants. And that included installing 1 Texas sage, 1 red yucca, there was, a couple things, and that was it. That was their, native plant package. And so I was happy with it and I worked with it. I supplemented it. And so I'm going to go through and kind of show you what I've done and my philosophy on how to plant the yard and how to kind of take care of it, which is kind of the lazy method. I just let things grow where they want to go, grow where they want to grow. And I put enough effort in to pick things out that I don't want there, or to plant 1 or 2 species that I really like and help them reseed. So the size of the yard, complete lot size is about 17,000 square feet, which is about 1/3 of an acre. Like I told you a little bit about the history. The front yard started off with that native plant package, and the backyard was just all whatever was growing there. And the house is outside of 1604 up in the Stone Oak area. So we really do not have a lot of soil. There's probably 6 inches of soil. And in the backyard, it's just limestone under that. But the trees have found a way to get their roots through that rock, and they've opened up fissures. And that little bit of soil does support things. One of the secrets that I've used to help with that is my neighbors bag up all their oak leaves. And then I just say, give it to me. And I just throw it in the backyard and spread it all around. And it slowly breaks down. And maybe you get a 1/16 of an inch of soil per year, but it works. So really, my whole philosophy is to try to, I don't have an irrigation system. I have started irrigating by hand more now though, because during some of the heat waves in the summer, I've lost plants because I was like, I don't need to water them. I don't need to do that. And then by the time you realize the plant is unhealthy, it's too late. They passed away. But let me get into this, the first flower. So I'll have my first, I wanted to tell you a little quick story though. I think that I'm a little bit lucky to be here today beyond being invited, but we had a rain event today. I don't know if everyone experienced it, but it was a thunder rain event too out where I live, but it was raining really hard. So I decided, as any good landscape architect will do, I'm going to go look out the window and look at the rain. And I happen to have a small balcony in my backyard where I can overlook and look at the gutters. So I went out there and I'm under a metal type roof, looking at the rain, looking around, and I see a flash, and microseconds later, the thunder hit. which means it was really close. I mean, it was like a shotgun in my ear. And I was like, oh, I'm going back inside right now. So I'm sure you guys have all experienced that. It was a little bit scary though for me today, but I am happy to be here. I want to jump in and talk about this first flower that we're looking at here, four-nerve daisy. And this flower is a wildflower in my backyard, which I'm kind of developing into a meadow. So I've been talking a lot. I know it's time to get into some of the pictures and look at the pretty flowers, but this flower is really one of the main two flowers that are in my meadow right now. Blooms throughout the year, very drought tolerant. I do now drag a hose out there and water that back meadow a little bit just to keep some of these flowers blooming a little bit. But this does great in full sun and reseeds easily. I did about 4 years ago, bought a native seed, bag from Native American Seed, and it had a whole bunch of stuff in it. Four-nerve daisy, I know it had bee balm, gaillardia, it had a bunch of different things in it. And those have started coming in now, but kind of at different times. But right now, I'll show you the next slide shows kind of a picture where we're going with this. So this is the backyard, and it is unimproved. A little funny story. While working with the River Authority, we had a work group that people would come over and help with the yards. Like we would go to someone's house and build a rain garden. I invited the group over to my house and we built a little rain garden in the front yard. And my wife was there. She's not a landscape architect. And she shared with everyone her famous name for the backyard, the Garden of Whedon. Had everyone laughing. And so that's what she affectionately refers to it as. So this is what the backyard looks like today, May 2024. And so you can see four-nerve daisy is all over the place. Also, there's a lot of weesach in there, which I don't necessarily want so much. At the last time I presented this, and I'll show some pictures later on, there was only one or two weesach, and someone made the comment like, you should keep those because they're good for the martins and good for birds. I was like, okay, but out of laziness, I just have not gone through it and cut those down, or at least thin them out a little bit. I did do it once and they popped back up. So I'm gonna have to be a little bit more forceful next time around. Oh, so jumping to the front yard. So this is kind of what the front yard looks like. And you can see a little walkway in that. I have some limestone slabs and those are embedded in limestone rocks. And that was part of the kind of water feature or water capturing feature that we built as part of the Watershed Wise group at the River Authority that people came over. But what I want to highlight on this slide is the red yucca. This is the one that the builder planted in 2006 as a little 1 gallon in about 3 foot from the driveway. And now it's about 6 foot in diameter. And I have to cut the edges of it so I can get in my truck. But it is super healthy. It doesn't require too much water. Of course, a little bit more water and you get a little bit more blooms. I would refer to this, as a landscape architect, as a bulletproof plant. You really can just put these anywhere and they're going to do well. I haven't had too much experience where they die back. Maybe if you water them too much, that might be one case. But it does very well in my front yard. I think it matches well with the mealy blue sage. It looks really nice. And I do get a lot of comments from neighbors saying, oh, they like it when it blooms. The one thing you do have to watch out for is the deer like the blooms too. And they will come up and nibble on those and take the whole plant down. So I think my theory is to surround it with a lot of other plants so the deer can't get near it. So this slide was from 2020. Oh, I don't have a now slide of that. But jumping then to the next plant, mealy blue sage. This is right in front of that red yucca. And this has to be one of my favorite plants. Very easy to get to reseed, very attractive, blooms constantly throughout the year, likes full sun. And as a landscape architect, and just a gardener in general, I think we always struggle in Texas with full sun plants and then the shade under the oak trees. But this one does great in full sun. And it looks great too. I even didn't plant it, but I got the small white blooms, which I think is from the hill country version of it. So I got a little bit lucky. I don't have a picture of that, but it does kind of mutate a little bit and you'll get some white blooms for the flowers. And this is also another plant that the deer in my area, they don't even touch it. You know, there's probably other things that they're more interested in. Then jumping to the Anacacha orchid. And I want to go back a couple slides so that you can see off to the right in this slide, you can see my Anacacha orchid tree, which is right there about 10 foot high. I planted it from maybe 3 foot high and it grew within 2 or 3 years to that height and was doing great. And it's right in the middle of that limestone rock area. It loved it there, didn't require too much watering, was super healthy. And then a couple years ago in the summer, I didn't water it and I left town or something. When I got back, it had cracked and fallen over. And I still to this day question if my wife had anything to do with that. But when it blooms, it's beautiful. It's very easy to grow. And in fact, I still have little suckers growing up right now. And that is the one thing that I might have to say it could be a little bit aggressive in that the suckers are coming up. And I just want one tree. I don't want to start with all these little suckers off of little roots. I want just one tree. And so I have to keep clipping those back. Another good story about this plant is if you have it out there and it hasn't rained for a while, when it does rain, the seed packets snap like firecrackers and spread seeds everywhere. So I do have plants growing in other parts of my garden, unintended. And that's also a little bit annoying because it's very difficult to pull the roots out of these. But it is, if you want just a single tree and you can get it established, great tree. So here's what it looks like now in that area. You can see the suckers growing up. And I have to go through there and pull those and kind of trim them back and maybe train one to be a tree. I think the lesson there is don't miss the irrigation. And that's one thing that I have changed a lot now is that I try to, even though my original philosophy was to not irrigate a lot of these native plants once they were established, because I thought they were completely established. Now I still try to make it out once or twice a week and water everything enough to just make sure I don't lose too much, because I lost quite a few 2 years ago in the middle of the summer. And this was one of the ones that I lost, Blackfoot daisy. I had this planted in my front parkway, and I'll show you a picture coming up where you can see it and this is the actual plant. It was doing great, probably about 2 foot in diameter, insects all over it all the time, healthy, required very little irrigation. And then I believe it got a little too hot and the neighbor's dog might have visited it just one too many times. And then it started to die off in the middle. And eventually the whole plant died. I could water it a little bit, but I couldn't bring it back. And that was about 2 years ago. And then lo and behold, this year it popped back up. So it took some time off, died all the way back underground. The roots were still there and it popped back up. And so the deer have been sampling it recently, but they are leaving it alone and it's looking a lot better. I really do hope that this one will come back and bush out a little bit and that I can take care of it more, give it a little bit more irrigation, because I would like this to propagate in that whole front parkway. I think it's a perfect place for it, meaning that's a very hot area and Blackfoot daisy really doesn't like any kind of, don't care for it, just ignore it, and it's going to do well. And that's the perfect place for a plant like that. So that's my plan. I hope that it agrees and works with me on that. Jumping in, still in the front yard now, now underneath the oak trees. And this was a plant that I researched. I was looking for something to plant under the oak trees in that shade. And I looked for this and found a couple examples, planted those about 6 years ago, and made sure to put down cedar mulch because this plant is adapted to growing under cedar trees. And now under the oak tree, it spreads out, reseeds every year. As you can see, it's beautiful, lots of red flowers. and it'll do that all through the spring and summer. It even reseeds so much that it's going out now into the limestone rock in the front yard into full sun. And it does die back a little bit there if I don't give it too much water, but I'm encouraging it to go as far as it wants because it's not a super woody plant. It doesn't leave a lot of remnants when it dives back. And so I really would like to see more of this growing in also. And a big secret here for me is like, it's a plant that works in shade under oak trees. And that's something so hard to find. This next picture shows some more of the cedar sage. And this is where the flowers have died back a little bit. But I want to point out everything that is in this area under those oak trees that you can see in this picture if you look closely. And this is what I consider ground cover. I like to keep all that ground covered under there so that you don't get a lot of weeds or other things growing in. So see if you can spot everything. This is under a live oak. There's cedar sage. There's some Turk's cap in there, lyre leaf sage, autumn sage. Then I have the cedar mulch, and you can even see the oak leaf mulch from the trees drop down in there. And this is kind of my philosophy, is for those areas to just not touch the area. Let everything underneath that oak tree work itself out. Try to walk through it as little as possible. And I think it's healthy for the tree, healthy for all those plants. And I've had good luck with that, meaning I do water this area maybe once or twice a week, but I don't overwater it, just enough to keep everything healthy. And I think that's really good for the oak tree too. Oftentimes people can overwater their lawns, and the oak tree might look great, but it's growing too fast and it's not going to have its full lifespan. So I think this is super healthy for the oak tree and all the plants underneath it, and it keeps weeds from growing in my front yard. Part of that is, letting the plants find their place too. They're a lot more successful when they grow where they want to be rather than where I put them. And I may have planted 2 or 3 of each of these plants, but now I probably have about 10 times that many. And they spread down the hill, spread all around. And that's one of the things I like too. I guess people could call me frugal in that I don't like to go out and buy a bunch of plants. I let them kind of go on their own. And on this next slide, you can see this is that front parkway. We're highlighting the Gulf Muley in this slide, but if you look down the parkway all the way at the end, you can see the Blackfoot daisy. This was 4 years ago. When it was starting, it was healthy, but you can see a little brown spot in the middle. You can also see the Anacacha orchid tree doing well there, and the red yucca, mealy blue sage in the background. And that area straight in the back of the slide behind the Anacacha orchid tree is the live oak area where everything's kind of in shade. But highlighting on this one is the Gulf Muley. And I planted this in my front parkway. I planted 3 of them. You can see 2 here. All 3 were together, but then I separated them a little bit because they started to grow into each other. I put the other one down at the end of that parkway. And this was 4 years ago. They look really good here. I'll have a picture coming up to show how they look right now. And they've kind of got a little shaggy. I think their water requirements are a little bit more than I'm providing. And maybe people do recommend that since these are deciduous and they kind of die back in the winter, that you should shear them around Valentine's Day. And I don't do that every year. I don't like that look of that kind of just naked plant or dead naked plant. But I think I probably should start to do that. And then if you've seen these, I don't have a picture, but in the fall, early winter, they start to bloom. Very nice pink flowers, kind of airy looking. But here's how they look right now, kind of shaggy looking, not so great, but they do reseed well. You can see behind on the other side of the sidewalk, there's a brand new one that just kind of sprouted up on its own. And there are a couple more growing in my front yard inside near the Weberville sedge and near some of the other plants. So they do reseed. I would recommend them, but they do require a little bit more work in my yard, in the full sun out there. I think it's just a little hot for them. And moving on to I think you referred to it as meadow sedge, Weberville sedge. So this is one of my favorite plants also. And I went out when I was looking to find something to put in my front yard, was looking for a sedge that would do well in full sun and shade. And I found this, I think, at one of the native plant sales here. And I just bought two of them. And I put them in and they started growing. And then you can see the seed heads on this. One of my favorite parts is these seed heads, once they start to dry out, you can walk up to them, kind of just touch them a little bit, and the individual seeds fall into your hands. They're like little grape nuts. So you can just collect those. And then I just walk around my yard throwing them out like Jake Appleseed, just throwing the Weberville sedge out. And it's worked great though. Like I have front yard, backyard, maybe about 20 plants now from those first two. And they do well in full sun. Of course, they always like a little bit of irrigation and they'll do a little bit better. But they grow very well along these walkways. Also in the shade, they'll grow in there too. So they work well, stay evergreen all year long, and easily reseed. So one of my favorite plants because they spread on their own and work well with other things, cover the ground well, and look nice. So that was 4 years ago. Here's some area along my front walkway where, these ones just all are from seed over here. And to the left of this picture is a downspout that comes off the gutter in my house, feeds into that rocky area. So the rainwater kind of goes through there. They get plenty of irrigation. Like today, they're probably super happy and doing very well. And I look forward to many more seed heads popping up soon so I can go out and spread the seed some more. I don't know if I could really use this as a turf replacement, but they say you can. It's just a little too clumpy possibly to do that, but it is a possibility. And the next plant I wanted to point out is buffalo grass. I'm super excited about this plant. I bought a small 1 gallon pot at a native plant sale and put it in my front yard just about 4.5 years ago, before the first presentation. So this is from 4.5 years ago after I planted that one little pot, and you can see the stolon creeping along and new plants popping up. And since then, it has done great. It's super drought tolerant. It actually requires full sun and so well-drained soils, but it will tolerate some clay. So, it has a lot of uses around your yard. It is a warm season grass. So in the winter, it will turn brown, and you have to know that. It's not dead. It's just kind of sitting there until spring comes back and it gets a little bit more water, and it'll pop right back up. It does spread from seeds and from stolons. And there are male, female plants, and that's some kind of adaptation because what I read was that it was wind-borne pollinated. And that's an adaptation, so not have inbreeding of some sort. But you're supposed to, what's interesting is once those plants they're separate, but they're close together, they start competing with each other. And they had recommendations for how close to have your male and female plants. So I didn't get too far into it, but there's something there. This is suitable as a turf grass replacement. And in fact, there are a couple different name brands out there like Habiturf and Thunder Turf, which include buffalo grass and some other blue grama, curly mesquite, I believe. And those are available commercially, but you can just go out and get the seeds for this yourself. And what I have found that I dug up a piece of the brown stuff in the winter, and I put it over in another part of my yard on the other side of the driveway. And I thought it died and it was gone. But lo and behold, it just popped up this spring, and I have a little tuft of it. This is the first place that I planted it. So this is right now. So it's spread between some other plants, and it's doing super well right here. I believe those are all male plants from what I've learned. The flower on the male plants is up high, and on the female plants, it's down low, close to the base. So it's doing super well here. It's filled in all this area between some other plants, and it's continuing to grow out and fill that in. So I think it's doing well there. And this is the little tuft on the other side of the driveway that I thought was completely dead, and now is doing very well on its own and sending out stolons on its own. So my plan is to get in there, remove some of the Bermuda grass in St. Augustine so that there's not much to compete with, and let this take over that area, kind of encourage it. And I think that's, a great philosophy for a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is that selective removal. Yes.
Are you going to mow it?
No, I do not plan on mowing it. I will just let it grow. It'll only get 4 to 6 inches high, and it kind of falls over. Eventually, I'd like to replace all the turf in my front yard with buffalo grass. Now, underneath the oak tree, which I do have some St. Augustine right now, I don't think I'll do well into there. So I'm going to let some other plants just creep into there. And they say Augustine's not even really doing that well in there. So I'll just let some other plants grow in there. But yeah, I'm not going to mow it. We'll see how the wife goes with that. We all know how that goes. So this slide is from 4 years ago, and this shows the backyard looking down towards, you can see the fence along the back. And, 4 years ago, 2020, I moved into the house in 2014 when the renters had weed whacked everything down to the dirt. So this is from 2014 to 2020, 6 years of growth. There's some grass in the foreground, a crepe myrtle, and then the back it's that we have some nice oak trees that have found a way to get their roots through the limestone. And then behind that, though, it's just an open area because underneath that soil, it's just solid limestone. So that's my kind of meadow area. So that's 4 years ago, and I'm happy to report that this is what it looks like now. Like I've gotten so much understory growth, and that understory is primarily oak suckers popping up, but there's also cedar elms, a bunch of agarita, hackberry. There's a lot of different stuff growing in there. Some of the bad stuff, I've got a lot of the King Ranch blue stem, non-native lantana, and then too much weesach, I believe. But each of those is maybe not easy to handle. The lantana, I can just pull that out really easily. The weesach, I can cut that back. The King Ranch blue stem, I found that it's so clumping, and if your soil is soft, it's easy to really just get the whole thing out at one time. And if you do that, other grasses can then compete better and grow in. And that's what I plan on happening. Now, I do need to go through this once again, though, and remove a lot of the small oak trees that are growing up. It's just too much. What do they call that? A mott, I believe. Yeah, it's definitely a mott. And then this is looking 4 years ago at that back meadow area. So back then, there was Gaillardia, some of the 4-nerve daisy. You can see some bee balm in the foreground, and then that one weesach that people encouraged me to keep. Here's what it looks like today. So got a lot more weesach. You can see in my tomato gardens, but it has grown a lot more in, and I'm happy to report a large portion of that is Cytodes gramis. So I'm getting some of the native grasses in there, and that's really what I want to happen. I am going through and removing the King Ranch blue stem, getting that out of there. And at the end of the slide show, I'll share my story about my most, I guess, is hate a good word for it? Most hated invasive plants. That may be a little bit strong, but I don't think so. So still in the backyard, have some Texas milkweed. This is about 4 years ago. It's planted in a kind of a shady area in amongst a bunch of Greg's mistflower, and there's a Texas lantana below it. So 4 years ago, it was looking really good, I would say. Now it's struggling a little bit. You can see it kind of off to the right there. I think it's just got too much competition in there and maybe not enough sun. So if I thin things out a little bit, I think that will do well. The lantana is still in there also, just really hard to see. Most of that that you see right there is Greg's mistflower. It's just not blooming. But that would be one thing that I'm not sure. It might just, I think it's just not enough sun is what I think it is, but I'm not 100% sure. Also wanted to share this mountain laurel that's in the backyard. This was 4 years ago. Small mountain laurel, volunteered right next to my air conditioning unit. You can also see all to the left the volunteer lyre leaf sage growing in. So I didn't plant any of this, all just kind of popped up. And then I thought, well, that's nice to have that mountain laurel there. It's going to eventually shade my air conditioning unit. And yes, it has. Here's what it looks like now. Now there's some hackberry in there, which I probably need to go through and remove. But that the mountain laurel is shot up. It's off the screen. It's probably about 6 foot tall right now. And I don't water that at all. In fact, I think that's one plant that I would share that I never water my mountain laurel, and it does great everywhere. Another backyard plant, prairie celestial. Just thought this looked very beautiful and doesn't pop up every year, and you have to really catch it right. From what I understand, it blooms in the morning. By the end of the day, that bloom's closed up. I believe it's part of the iris family, but super beautiful when you catch it right. I didn't see any this year though. And then of course the hill country rain lily. I have these all over the backyard, and after a rain event, they all pop up. Another fun plant to reseed because the seed head is just all these little black seeds. You can shake them all into your hand at one time and spread them all over your yard. Can never have too many, I figure. And then highlighting the lyre leaf sage. This one, I don't see it used very often or planted in a lot of people's yards. I did plant this, about 6 to 8 years ago, and it is spread around a lot in my yard. I like the way it looks. It doesn't bloom as much as the cedar sage, and I do like the blooms on it. It doesn't bloom as often, nor as it doesn't last as long as the cedar sage, but it does look very nice. I have heard some other architects refer to it though kind of as a weed, that it spreads too much. But in the case of my yard, that hasn't happened. So I'm happy. I would like to have more of this around my yard. And then also to highlight the Sidotes grama, the state grass of Texas. And what I'm really aiming to get growing in my backyard is a lot of the Sidotes grama, to have it cover everywhere. And really, like I said, if I can go through, and you can see some of the blue stem in here, the Cara blue stem, if I just can go through and hand pull those, then this will compete well, but it needs that little help. And so I've been super successful on one hillside where it's kind of taken over that whole hillside, and no KR blue stem is in there, but there's still some on the edges. It's just one of those things where you have to selectively go through and remove what you don't want. Yes.
It looks like you have a lot of live oak leaves. Where do they come from?
Those are there in the backyard. There is a patch of the limestone that is cracked and rocky, and the oaks were there already. So they have established their roots in that area, and that's all in the backyard. It's between the house and that meadow.
So you just spread
The leaves, these leaves are naturally falling from the tree, and I just let them be. It's eventually my wife and I have some plans to do some improvements on the backyard, and that's when tough decisions are going to have to be made, where I might have to lose a couple trees, but we'll see about that. But yeah, I'm a big proponent of letting the leaves fall and let them stay on the ground and break down slowly. I don't bag up any of my leaves, and I kind of I just don't understand why my neighbors do, but I guess it's, they're looking for a certain aesthetic. So this is what it looked like 4 years ago. And then now this is just highlighting that the back meadow does have a lot of this Sidotes grama spraying around, and I'm encouraging it as much as possible by pulling plants that compete with it. Also, prickly pear, it was in the backyard when I started, and it has spread out on its own. This one was growing in the rocks underneath one of the kind of not great looking oak trees, but it is done very well there. And since then, this one just volunteered in the backyard. And of course, I don't water that one. But it's doing great. It's turning almost into a tree. So I'm not sure what my ultimate plan is for that. It doesn't really fit well with backyard use, but for the time being, I'm just letting it grow. Here I'm highlighting the cedar elm. This cedar elm I did receive from the city of San Antonio at one of the tree giveaways, and it was about 3 foot high. Right here, it's about 6 foot high. You can see it's about as high as that crook in the oak tree behind it. And this was 4 years ago. So I did make sure that I watered it very consistently for the first 4 years until it was established. And I'm happy to report now that it is probably doubled in size. This is even further back, but you can see that same crook in the tree, and it's even extending up higher off the frame. And it is actually, there's other areas around the backyard that there other seedlings have popped up. I'm not sure if from this tree, but I look at it as insurance against oak wilt. In case any of my trees do have oak wilt, I do have a whole bunch of cedar elms ready to take off if that were to happen. Luckily, we do not have oak wilt in my neighborhood, but I know it's not too far away. And I'm constantly watching neighbors pruning their trees or having their trees pruned by so-called professionals that do not prune at the right time of the year, nor apply paint on the limbs. So I'm trying the best I can to control it, but not everybody is. So it's insurance in case that were ever to happen in our neighborhood that we got some oak wilt. Knock on wood, let's hope not. And I'm also highlighting this plant. This is from 4 years ago, Texas croton, which is certainly not a plant that you would go through and get at the nursery and plant in your backyard, because it's mainly associated with disturbed soil. But that's what's going on in my backyard. Certain areas that are just soil, very rocky, and these plants, obviously, there's a seed bank there, and they're popping up. And I just let them grow. I don't see any damage from that. They don't have any annoying seeds on them or anything. And I look at it as they're part of the succession of plants. So they grow, they do certain things to the soil, to the ecosystem, and then the next plant comes in and fills its space. That's my theory. We'll have to see what the ecologists think about that. I also want to highlight this plant's from recently, Texas sage also, and it's just because of the beautiful bloom. And so this was in July 2024, this year, right after a rain event. And this is one of the original sages that the builder planted in front of the house. So this is, what, 20 years later? No, 18 years later. This Texas sage is still alive and still blooming beautifully. Definitely what I would consider a bulletproof plant. Another plant that I recently planted in the front yard about 4 years ago is inland sea oats, and this is working wonderfully under the oak trees. I planted, I think, one, possibly two, and now I must have 20 plants. Slightly aggressive, I might say, is that it has spread across sidewalks and gone other places. Doesn't bother me too much, but it is a little aggressive. I think pushing out some other plants. It is great for neighborhood cats to hide in. And so that's another not so good, maybe not a benefit, but certainly it does keep area under the oak trees green and looking very lush. And I also want to highlight Gaillardia, and this is because along with the four-nerve daisy in the backyard, this plant really adds to the meadow effect. Not all the plants probably that I've highlighted today are specifically Texas natives. They all might be native to Texas, but they may not be only Texas natives. And this is one of those plants, from what I understand. It's a cross between two other Gaillardias, and it's just the one that is growing here pretty much everywhere. I'm sure it was in one of those seed packs that I got from Native American Seed, and it does reseed well. And the reason I like it so much is that it fills that meadow with color, and it's growing something and pushing out the weeds. Once you have something covering that ground, it's so much better than getting a bunch of weeds growing in there. So this is what that looks like in the backyard. You can see the color that it provides. And this is a different angle. It's interesting how part of the yard the Gaillardia filled in, and then the other part, the Fordner Daisy filled in. So they kind of found their place, and they're working to make everything work. In between that, there's all sorts of other native grasses, some that I have not identified yet, but I think they're a Texas seep grass. I'm not 100% sure, but everything's filling in, and I go through, and anytime any KR blue stem grows back there, I try to pull that, or St. Augustine back there, try to pull that. And some of the St. Augustine rode in with the neighbors' oak leaves. So we'll just have to deal with that. Underneath all those oak trees between the house and that back meadow, the arboreta plants are really just growing in very well. These were very small, probably 10 years ago. And without me doing much at all, I certainly don't water them. They are filling in, and as you can see, a lot of fruit on them. I'm tempted to make a Agarita wine, but I haven't done that yet. But this year I certainly had enough berries. And then I told you I was going to highlight, or at least talk about, my story of the one plant that I just despise, this hedge parsley. Well, it's my favorite plant to hate. So this is this, I had an incident, I guess it's called planticide or something. I have eradicated this plant from my yard. About 5 years ago, I was back there, and right after a rain in the spring, it was all over the place. So I made it my daily mission to go out and pull 500 plants. I pulled up more than 10,000. So that's 20 days of pulling plants, probably about an hour a day. But I got it all out, and now I get less than 500 a year. So you can get it done in half an hour or so. But that's a success for me. The name right there says it all: tall sock destroyer. It gets those burrs on your socks, and you come in the house and they're everywhere, and your dog has them, and they grow very small, just all over the place. I really it was my mission to get rid of this plant. Yeah. I just threw them in the trash. Yeah, I don't think you should compost these. I don't want to take any chances of the seeds getting out. I try to catch them before the seed, flowers and seeds, but they're quick. They are really quick. So I just highlight this to share my story of going through that, and hope that everyone kind of shares that hate of this plant. But I see it when I'm driving on the roadside. I'm like, oh, somebody's got to do something about that, or else it's going to take over. But I'm pretty sure that pretty much sums up my presentation for today. I would like to answer some questions. And once again, thank you all for inviting me here to share my story and go through my yard again. Thank you.
I just have to ask you, for the Zoom audience, if there's questions in the room, if you can repeat the question so the Zoom audience can hear the question.
Definitely.
We have a couple from Zoom, but does anyone have questions in the room?
Do you prune like the Texas sage or anything?
So the question was, do I prune the Texas sage? No, I do not. I, in fact, don't prune a lot of my plants, except maybe for Esperanza. I do, they do get pruned in one way or another, as my wife goes by and twists off the branch. And I do occasionally clean that up. But yeah, I don't prune a lot unless it really gets overbearing. In fact, my theory, especially on the oak trees, is they can take care of themselves. I don't want to get any arborist in there to do anything and touch them. They know how to take care of themselves better than anybody else. Of course, unless there's branches rubbing on each other or something growing into the house or something like that. Yes.
Do you see prickly pears doing well under shade?
So the question was, do I see prickly pear doing well in the shade? And there are some places on my property where the prickly pear is growing in a rocky area of limestone underneath oak trees. And so it's very thin soil, and it's probably partial sun, and the prickly pear is growing there. It's not doing super great. It's not like that one that was out in the full sun, the picture that we looked at, but there are places that it is growing in shade. And that was there since I purchased the house. Yes.
Do you have any pathways in the backyard or areas with picnic table or something like that?
The question was, do I have any pathways or a picnic table, anything like that in the backyard? And the answer is right now, no, I do not. My wife and I have been talking about possibly putting a pool in or a extended deck. And I've been talking about putting in a shed for a lot of tools or possibly getting a car back there. But right now, no, I do not have any pathways. Typically what I do to make it so I can walk through a certain area though is I'll just run my lawnmower down a certain path just to clear it out so I can walk through there. I didn't mention it, but even I don't have anything, there's no access to the backyard for deer or anything else. So it's protected from that, but I still get a lot of chiggers back there. So I'll walk through there and then a day later and I'll start itching. And I'm like, I just don't know if there's any way around that, but I do try to keep pathways that I can walk through without touching plants.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering about wildflower mixes in, again, you mentioned a couple there that didn't go well. Is there anything else in the past about that?
Yeah, the question was that I mentioned one of the seed mixes that I grew in the backyard, and that how some of the plants like the Gaillardia, the bee balm, four-nerve daisy, they've done well, and other plants have not. And I was looking through the catalog today and trying to remember which seed mix that I purchased. And I couldn't find the one, at least in the recent catalog, the one that I didn't remember which one it was. But I do know that I wanted meadow flowers. And so I think, and grasses. I think that there are certain things that are not popping up. And I maybe like some of the blue grama, different grasses that I think were in the mix, and that I just don't see them yet. And it might be that my soil is too rocky in the backyard or not developed enough. But I can't tell you exactly what those other plants are because I don't remember which mix I threw back there.
Okay, some Zoom questions,
Okay.
and you're doing a great job repeating the question, so you still need to do it.
Oh, I did.
They
Okay.
don't know that I'm asking. Okay, so, do you want to keep the meadow area like a prairie, or would you consider letting the weesatch stay to fix the nitrogen in the soil and cause secondary succession?
So the question was, do I want to redevelop the meadow area or
Keep it as a prairie?
keep it as a
or
prairie,
Let the weesatch.
or let the weesatch kind of grow more so that it can fix nitrogen and improve the soil? Does that pretty much capture the
Yes,
question?
so-
Yeah. I think ultimately I want to trim the weesatch back pretty soon before it gets out of hand. I do realize that it is doing a good thing, but I still have it's limited soil in the back. It's really 6 inches of soil. The weesatch has probably found a way to get its roots into some cracks, but it's not going to do too much more to improve that little 6 inches of soil. So I'm going to keep some, probably the largest one in the middle, and then trim the other ones down because they're very, very prickly and they really limit the amount of mobility you can do in the backyard. And eventually we want to have a use for the backyard, the deck or some kind of structure. But I want to keep all the native plants the way they are right now and just have edges to them so that it's usable and be able to teach my son about them and maybe get through to my wife that this is this is the way it should be. We don't have to water it that much. It's not an English garden, but it does have aesthetic qualities. Maybe.
Okay, we've got some more Zoom
Okay.
questions. Do you ever scatter compost in your meadow?
The question is, do I ever scatter compost in the meadow? And the answer is no, I do not. I do have a compost pile, but it's really informal in that I throw everything on it and water it and try to turn it every once in a while. But I threw some heavy oak branches in it and it's pretty It's slowly degrading. But at one time I did get the soil from that, and I used that more for planting plants rather than spreading it around. My theory was throwing the oak leaves in that back meadow area that they would naturally kind of compost. And they have in areas, made a layer about 3 inches deep. And as that degrades, you'll end up getting about a 1/4 inch or a 1/16 inch of soil from that. Hopefully my neighbors continue to feed me the oak leaves, and that'll improve that meadow area. I've noticed improvement already. At least it's something there now.
Okay, some more. Do you find that this habitat encourages more snakes and scorpions?
So the question was, do I find this habitat encourages snakes and or scorpions? And I'm happy to report I have never seen a snake in my backyard. Now, I don't know if that's because I'm not very good at spotting them or that I do have a fence around the area, and the fence does go down to the ground. And a fox and or armadillo also consider my backyard a place to eat. So they are constantly digging under the fences and coming in and rooting through the backyard. And my tomatoes have suffered from that too. But they may be feeding on small snakes and scorpions. Of course, everyone I think gets scorpions in their house here in Texas. And when it happens, my wife is up on a chair. But thankfully, we've got a Cocker Spaniel, and I refer to him as the scorpion hunter because he always sniffs them and then he barks at him. And then I just walk over and able to take care of it, dispatch that scorpion. But I have only seen one snake in my yard, and it was right when I bought the house. So 18 years ago, and it was a garter snake going into one of the weep holes in the brick walls coming out of that hole. And but that's the only snake I've seen. So yeah.
Couple more. Do you have any plans to add additional species?
Good question. The question was, do I have any plans to add additional species? And the answer is yes. I'm not specifically looking for anything right now, but I always am looking for things that provide some kind of ground cover, that somewhat like mealy blue sage or even autumn sage, something that grows well and flowers well and is easy to take care of and goes well with other native plants. I do want to mention though that I do have an honorable mention list of other plants that are in the yard that I didn't even get to yet, which includes Greg's mistflower, Texas lantana. I have a couple specimens of big blue stem, prairie wild rye, 3-flower melic, which is a grass. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's, I got that at one of the native plant sales here, and it is spread around the front yard. So I'd recommend that one a lot too. Of course, there's Texas live oak, Landheimer senna all over the backyard. Texas rock rose. I have some Flamicanthus. It hasn't bloomed yet, but it's there. Esperanza, woolly stomodia, horse herb. I have a beautyberry in the front yard. Of course, weesach and curved-leaf yucca. So there are a lot of other species there. I don't really have my eyes set on anything right now, though. But if anyone has any suggestions, I'm all ears.
Questions in the group?
Yes.
The Gaillardia grandiflora, it doesn't look very tall. You know, the native Gaillardia here is 18 inches, you know, it can cover acres of land, you know, it's very spread out mostly by reseeding every year. So it looks like you're seeded out, but this map is 18 inches tall.
So the question was, the Gaillardia in my backyard, typical Gaillardia is supposed to be about 18 inches. Is the one in my backyard about 18 inches tall? And I would say it's somewhere between 12 and 18 inches tall. It is fairly tall. I know it in the pictures, it probably doesn't do it justice, but it's a large area back there. You know, so I do think it's 12 to 18 inches tall.
Just wondered if it's short, relatively speaking.
Yeah, and I don't know, could you tell from the pictures if that was the native species? Like from my research, I didn't know there was a native species for.
It's like the native species has a lot of, you know, of phenotypic variation. in the structure, and that kind of looked like a native to me.
Okay.
But, you know, it could be a cross.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's from the seed mix that I threw back there.
Well,
Yeah.
It's probably native.
Yeah.
I think the thinness of your soil does not allow the large amount of growth.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yes.
Being a landscape architect that you are, do you see more of your clients going towards native?
The question is, as a landscape architect, do I see more of my clients going towards native plants? And it's somewhat difficult for me to answer because I am a landscape architect, but I do mostly things related to technology or mapping. And some stuff related to stormwater treatment. I'm not the plant specialist at my company. We have, a plant specialist that spends hours going through mixes and figuring out what plants work well together. And our whole company, everything we do is based around native plants. So we don't work with clients really that are looking for something that's not a native plants here for Texas. And so I think more and more, especially, our offices out of Austin, although we do have 3 landscape architects that work down here in San Antonio from home, more and more, the clients are looking for native plants and realizing that there are benefits, especially when it comes to the amount of water that they have to provide for the plants or the lack of fertilizer. So there are benefits and people are realizing that.
Okay, so I think that's a great place to end because the time has come, but, Peter had a great idea that we should probably, iNaturalist for yarn and document all your species, so. Let's give Jake another round of applause.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Is this yours, Fred?
Get this off there.